The film begins in the barren desert of Utah, where a filthy child is seen wandering, munching on a severed human finger. Soon after, we are introduced to our protagonist, Wyndham, who drives in the same area. Wyndham is a professional photographer who has traveled there to capture the eclipse. He climbs a challenging rock formation and eventually finds an ideal location to set up his camera. As the eclipse begins, Wyndham takes a series of breathtaking photos. Satisfied, he decides to head back to his car, which is parked along the roadside. Just then, he spots a child crying alone in the distance. Concerned, Wyndham approaches and asks the child what happened. The boy explains that he got separated from his parents and is now lost. Worried for the boy's safety, Wyndham invites him to come to his car so they can search for his parents. However, the boy suddenly stands up and begins walking in the opposite direction, insisting that his parents are that way. This confuses Wyndham, but he feels he can't leave the young child alone and decides to follow him. As they continue walking, Wyndham notices that darkness is approaching and suggests they turn back. Oddly, the boy starts hurling insults at him before running off. This leaves Wyndham in a difficult situation, as it's getting darker and he is far from his car. He tries to make his way back to the main road, but quickly becomes disoriented. In desperation, he attempts to call for help, only to find there's no signal in the desert. A short while later, Wyndham is startled by the sound of a woman singing in the distance. He follows the melody and soon spots a cabin at the base of a canyon. Noticing a retractable ladder leading to the cabin, Wyndham cautiously descends. When he reaches the bottom, he knocks on the cabin door, and a woman named Alina answers. Wyndham explains his predicament, but Alina seems unfazed by his sudden appearance. She calmly invites him inside and offers him food, speaking very little. When Wyndham asks for directions to get out of the area, Alina remains silent, which frustrates him. As he attempts to leave, she insists that it's too late and urges him to stay. Left with no other choice, Wyndham agrees and lies down on a bed nearby. Later, he notices Alina undressing and cleaning herself in the next room, which unsettles him, but he chooses to ignore it and closes his eyes. The following morning, Wyndham leaves some money for Alina before attempting to depart. To his shock, he realizes the cabin is now surrounded by steep cliffs, something he hadn't noticed the previous night. Even more alarming is the fact that the lower portion of the ladder he used is now missing. When Alina wakes up, Wyndham asks about the missing ladder. She casually replies that the locals sometimes borrow it, and that it might be returned later or even the next day. Frustrated, Wyndham asks if there are any other ways to get out, but Alina calmly tells him there aren't. With no other options, Wyndham reluctantly decides to stay another day. He spends much of his time photographing the landscape and trying to scale the cliff, but the intense heat makes the climb impossible. In the afternoon, Alina offers to clean his clothes since they've gotten dirty. When he declines, she oddly remarks about what his wife might think seeing him in such a state. Startled by her comment, Wyndham quickly clarifies that he isn't married. The next day, Wyndham searches Alina's house for anything that might help him climb the cliff. He eventually discovers a pickaxe and attempts to use it to ascend the rocks. However, just as he's making progress, a group of children suddenly throws a severed animal head at him. Startled, Wyndham loses his balance and falls to the ground, losing consciousness. When he regains awareness, he realizes it's already nighttime, and he's in severe pain, noticing that the pickaxe has pierced his leg. In desperation, Wyndham screams for help, finally drawing Alina's attention. She rushes to his side and carefully removes the pickaxe while he cries out in pain. Moments later, Wyndham loses consciousness again, and Alina carries him back to the cabin to tend to his injuries. After 2 days, Wyndham feels slightly better and makes another attempt to escape. He stands at the bottom of the canyon, shouting for help, but his cries go unanswered. Frustrated and desperate, Wyndham drags Alina outside, demanding an explanation for what's happening. Instead of answering, Alina calmly tells him that she can take care of him and provide him with food. But Wyndham, growing more furious, insists that all he wants is to return to his normal life, emphasizing that he has a life beyond this place with people who depend on him. When Alina tries to approach him, Wyndham pushes her away and asks to be left alone. Shortly after, a boy named Corvus and his sister appear at the top of the canyon and call out to Wyndham. Corvus tells him that he heard the shouting earlier and asks if he needs help. Relieved, Wyndham explains how he's been trapped and desperately needs a way out. Corvus reassures him that he has a rope and promises to return soon. Filled with hope, Wyndham eagerly waits for the boy's return. Corvus eventually comes back, tossing the rope down and instructing Wyndham to tie himself to it. Wyndham, trusting the boy's words, does as he's told, and Corvus, along with a few other boys, begins to pull him up. But halfway through, they suddenly stop and start taunting Wyndham, who now hangs helplessly in midair. They cruelly swing the rope back and forth, and one even urinates on Wyndham's face, causing him to collide with a rock and lose consciousness. As the boys try to continue their torment, Alina appears out of nowhere and angrily scolds them in their native language. Her sudden intervention prompts the boys to flee the scene, leaving Wyndham injured and suspended. Later that night, Wyndham wakes up to find himself lying in Alina's bed. Determined to leave once more, he tries to stand but is too weak and collapses to the ground. In his frustration, he begins to cry, and Alina calmly suggests that he should accept his situation and adapt to this new life. Wyndham then asks her about the teenage boys and why they treated him so cruelly. Alina explains that they are just stray kids bound together by the harsh desert, and he shouldn't take their behavior personally since they're merely foolish and bored. The scene shifts to a few weeks later, showing Wyndham gradually accepting his fate and settling into a quiet life in the desert. During this time, Alina continues to care for him, and Wyndham begins to appreciate her efforts. One day, a teenage boy brings Alina a package filled with food and supplies, which catches Wyndham by surprise. Curious about the source of these items, he questions Alina, but she simply suggests that they should accept the gifts without asking too many questions. This remark makes Wyndham suspect that Alina might be a victim like him, trapped in this place against her will. That evening, a drunken Wyndham hears some noise outside and grabs a hammer to investigate. He stumbles upon Corvus, who is bizarrely dressed as a woman. After taunting Wyndham for a while, Corvus snatches the hammer, provocatively licks Wyndham's face, and then runs away. Enraged, Wyndham storms back into the cabin and confronts Alina, shouting that she's to blame for letting these deranged boys control their lives. As always, Alina remains silent, suggesting instead that he get some rest. She then calmly moves to her bed and begins cleaning herself completely naked. Overcome by his drunken state and pent-up emotions, Wyndham finally gives in to his desires and becomes intimate with her. A few days later, while Wyndham is tending to the garden, a boy named Lepus calls out to him from the top of the pit, curious about what he's doing. Wyndham explains that he's farming and mentions that even though they're in the desert, he has realized that the pit they're living in is like a microcosm. When Lepus asked about the term microcosm, Wyndham explains that it refers to creating small life forms within a larger environment. Impressed by Wyndham's knowledge, Lepus expresses an interest in learning more about such topics. Wyndham agrees to teach him, but asks for Lepus's assistance in return. Nervously, the boy backs away and quickly leaves. Later, back at the cabin, Wyndham notices an old photograph of a woman and asks Alina who she is. Alina explains that the woman in the photo was the first mother to come to this place. Confused by what she means, Wyndham is suddenly taken aback when Alina reveals that she's pregnant. She reassures him that he isn't obligated to take care of them if he doesn't want to. However, Wyndham, feeling betrayed, accuses Alina of deceiving him and angrily declares that he doesn't want his child raised by an inbred psycho like her. His cruel words deeply wound Alina, and she breaks down in tears. The next morning, while Wyndham is out jogging, Lepus approaches him once more. Wyndham seizes the opportunity to ask for Lepus's help, explaining that Alina is pregnant and that they need to find a way out. He urges Lepus to bring a rope, framing it as the start of his first physics lesson. The boy seems intrigued, and Wyndham further persuades him by promising that once they escape, they can all live together as a family. Lepus agrees to help but insists that they must act while everyone else is asleep. Unfortunately, their conversation is overheard by another teenage boy, who quickly intervenes and drags Lepus away. Later, back at the cabin, Alina confronts Wyndham about his conversation with Lepus. Wyndham explains that he finds Lepus kind and intelligent, unlike the other boys, whom he views as dangerous. He then reveals that Lepus has agreed to assist with their escape, which visibly upsets Alina. Wyndham also shares his dreams of leaving the pit, traveling the world, enjoying freedom, and even eating a cheeseburger. To his surprise, Alina doesn't know what a cheeseburger is, revealing that she has never been outside this place. That night, as Wyndham and Alina sleep, a disturbing scene unfolds at the edge of the canyon. The teenage boys, dressed in strange attire, perform a bizarre ritual. When Wyndham and Alina awaken the next morning, they are met with a horrifying sight. Lepus is tied to a rope, dangling lifelessly above the canyon, with his back brutally torn open. Alina screams in terror, crying out that brothers don't treat each other this way. Overcome with grief and rage, she accuses Wyndham of being the reason her son was killed, believing that his plans to escape led to this tragedy. Before Wyndham can fully grasp what she's saying, Alina, consumed by anger and pain, lashes out at him and eventually knocks him unconscious with a piece of wood. The story then jumps forward a few months, showing Wyndham confined in a cage, treated more like an animal than a human. Alina, now visibly pregnant, brings him just enough food and water to keep him alive, but speaks very little. One afternoon, Wyndham spots a female hiker at the top of the canyon and desperately calls out to her, pleading for help and urging her to contact the police. The woman seems concerned and tells him to wait while she makes the call, giving Wyndham a glimmer of hope. But his hopes are quickly dashed when he witnesses Corvus capturing the hiker and brutally killing her. Overwhelmed with despair, Wyndham pounds on the cage bars, coming to the grim realization that escape is impossible. That evening, a small child approaches Wyndham's cage and offers him a piece of fruit. Hungry and desperate, he eats it, but soon feels disoriented and lightheaded. As his vision blurs, he sees Alina and the teenage boys performing a disturbing ritual nearby. To his shock, Wyndham realizes that these boys are actually Alina's children, fathered by different men she has trapped over the years. During the ritual, Alina stands motionless with leaves covering her eyes as her children dance around a fire, chanting in a trance-like state. Days later, as the cold of winter starts to creep in, Alina brings a blanket to Wyndham in his cage. Seizing the chance, Wyndham begs her to let him go, confessing that he no longer wants to return to his old life. He claims he's willing to stay and raise all her children with her if she just releases him. But Alina coldly reveals the truth. She never truly cared about him. All she ever wanted was his seed to conceive a child. Now that she's pregnant, he serves no further purpose to her. The only reason she's keeping him alive is to wait for the birth of their child, after which he'll be of no use to her at all. The following morning, Alina begins to experience intense contractions and is in excruciating pain. Desperate for help, she releases Wyndham from his cage and pleads with him, admitting she has never gone through anything like this before. Despite the turmoil they've faced, Wyndham finds himself caring for his child and decides to assist her. However, just moments later, he sees the teenagers tossing a ladder into the canyon, offering him a chance to escape. This puts him in a moral dilemma. Alina needs his help, but the ladder represents his only chance at freedom. Ultimately, Wyndham chooses to leave Alina behind and heads towards the ladder. But he quickly stops in his tracks when he hears the sound of a newborn crying. Filled with joy, he turns around and embraces his daughter, momentarily forgetting all the pain and suffering he has endured, reveling in the happiness of fatherhood. Alina then takes the child back and assures him that she will care for their daughter, promising to nurture her until she can fulfill her purpose of becoming a mother herself. Alina expresses gratitude to Wyndham for playing his part, stating that his role is now complete. Confused by her words, Wyndham doesn't grasp the full implication of her statement, and before he can react, one of the older boys sneaks up behind him and slits his throat, killing him instantly. In the final scene, Alina is seen gathering Wyndham's belongings and placing them into a trunk. She then approaches her crying baby, attempting to soothe her. Outside, the camera pans to reveal Wyndham's lifeless body, decaying on the ground, a haunting reminder of his tragic fate. That's a wrap on today's movie recap. If you enjoyed the breakdown and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you never miss an update. Let me know in the comments what movie you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.